Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from in the world today, and welcome to our latest FIDIC webinar, where we'll be having a look at how best to build diverse and inclusive companies in the engineering, construction, and infrastructure sector by focusing on how to attract, retain, promote people to ensure that our businesses are truly sustainable for the future. My name is Prashant Kapura, the Managing Director of ICT Private Limited India and a board member at FIDIC. I'm delighted to welcome you today to this webinar on behalf of the FIDIC board. Today's webinar, which is titled Building More Diverse and Inclusive Companies, Diversity Best Practice for Attracting, Retaining, and Promoting People, has been organized by FIDIC's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Council. The council does important work in advising the FIDIC board on all aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the consulting engineering industry, and advising the board on improving diversity, equity, and inclusion in FIDIC itself. The council is also keen to promote inclusion, equity, and diversity as key drivers in achieving a sustainable, transparent, and more profitable engineering industry. Attracting, retaining, and promoting a diverse pool of talent is crucial for companies in our sector, especially given the diverse and ever-evolving challenges facing the sector. And over the next hour and a half, this webinar will offer some effective and practical measures to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion across businesses. Speakers at today's webinar will also address some important questions. How do we attract talent into the industry? What can the industry do to attract more women, minority, and underrepresented groups into its ranks? What are the best practice methods and strategies, and how are they working? How can these be implemented by different companies? And once we have attracted people, how do we retain them in our own businesses? More than ever before, the engineering, construction, and infrastructure sector needs to become more diverse and inclusive to meet the challenges of the increasing diverse world in which we operate. So practical and workable EDA/EI strategies are absolutely essential if companies in the sector are to compete with each other and other industries to avoid losing out in the battle for talent. This webinar will aim to address that challenge too. The webinar today will be hosted and will be chaired by Yust Mirema, partner at Pro6 Managers and chair of FIDIC's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Council. Our speakers today will highlight some of the key issues I've just mentioned and hopefully leave you with some practical tips and ideas that you can use in your own companies and workplaces. I'm looking forward to hearing their insights. And don't forget that we also want to hear from you. And you could use the chat box during the webinar to post your questions. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce your chair for today's event, Yust Mirema, partner at Pro6 and chair of FIDIC's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Council. Yust will introduce our speaker panels and guide us through the webinar. Yust, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Prashant, for that warm welcome and insightful introduction. Good day to everybody joining us from around the world. It's my pleasure to guide you through today's crucial webinar on building more diverse and inclusive companies in our industry. As Prashant mentioned, our focus today is on best practices for attracting, retaining, and promoting people to ensure our business are truly sustainable for the future. And this topic couldn't be more timely or important for our sector. We have an exceptional panel of speakers joining us today, each bringing unique insights and experiences. First, we will hear from Tina Albrechtsen from Ramboll in Denmark. As the Director of Global Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, Tina will share Ramboll's journey from developing their DEI strategy to implementing specific programs. Her experience will provide valuable insights into how large engineering consultancies can effectively implement their DEI strategies. Next, we will have Catherine Motley from the American Council of Engineering Companies, and she will discuss how they at ACAC measured progress on DEI, focusing on their benchmarking efforts using the Diversity Roadmap report. This will give us a clear picture on how the industry is progressing and where we need to focus our efforts. I will then provide an update on the FIDIC's DEI policy for 2025. This will give you a glimpse into the future direction of our industry-wide efforts and how FIDIC plans to support and guide member organizations on their DEI journeys. Lastly, we'll hear from Charlotte Downs from New Zealand, representing the diversity agenda. Charlotte will introduce the FIDIC Guide to Inclusive Meetings, and she will explain what it is, why it matters, and how you can use it in your next meeting. This practical tool will help us all create more inclusive environments in our day-to-day work. So throughout the webinar, we'll explore how to develop and implement effective strategies, the importance of measuring and benchmarking our progress, the role of industry-wide policy and guidelines, and practical tools and techniques for creating inclusive work environments. As Prashant mentioned, remember, this is an interactive session, so we really encourage you to use the chat function to ask questions throughout the webinar. We will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end, where we'll address as many of your questions as possible. So before we jump into the content, and I will give the floor to Tina, I would like to emphasize that building diverse and inclusive companies, it is not just a moral imperative, it's also a business necessity. In a rapidly changing world, diverse teams bring diverse perspectives, leading to more innovation, better problem solving, and ultimately more successful and resilient businesses. With that said, let's begin our journey into building more diverse and inclusive companies in the engineering, construction, and infrastructure sector. I'm excited to learn from our speakers and from all of you joining us today. So let's start with the first speaker, Tina. Tina Albrechtsen from Ramboll. Ramboll is a global engineering consulting company delivering sustainable expertise. Founded in Denmark in 1945, Ramboll today operates across 35 countries. Tina serves as the Director of Global Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at Ramboll and plays a key role in shaping and implementing their EID strategies and initiatives. Tina, very welcome to you, and I'm looking forward to hear and share your story.
Thank you, Joost. And I just want to say, I was looking at the chat, how wonderful to see such an international audience and participants that we have today. So I'm going to, in a little while, take you through the journey of Ramboll. And so it's not so much the activities that we work with right now, but it's the journey we've been on that actually got us to a global program. And I'm going to talk a little bit about design principles, developing our program, but also running the program. And we have been very intentional about those three areas. So, and then I will conclude with some of the most important lessons learned that we have had in Ramboll for now. It is an ongoing journey, so I think if you ask me next year, I would be wiser, but at least where we are now. So I will start in 2021 when Ramboll was developing our current business strategy called the Partner for Sustainable Change. Now, timing-wise, this provided us with a great opportunity to develop a global DEI program that would grow and mature alongside the current business strategy. So our program directly follows that trajectory of our business strategy. And it actually also allows us to support our business strategy as we go through it. Starting this journey, the first step for us was really to develop some design principles that would support and guide us in prioritizing our actual activities, and that we could also lean on for some of the difficult conversations that you sometimes have in organizations when you are starting this change journey. So under the headline of design principles, first up, we decided that we needed to be clear on our vision and the key outcomes we would expect to gain over the strategy period. And the vision really was to develop a program that would be aligned with who Ramboll is as an organization and that supports the business. And the key outcomes that we were looking for would be to develop and implement a globally aligned and comprehensive program, allowing for geography-specific initiatives, but under the same umbrella. It also had to be congruent with the Ramboll legacy, culture, and fundamentals. And what I mean by that is that everything we do and everything we implement needs to be recognizable to our employees in Ramboll. And last but certainly not least, it had to be endorsed and supported by leadership. And I think in the context of working with DEI initiatives, that can be difficult and sensitive in nature, leadership plays such an important role. They really need to act as role models for what you're trying to achieve. So during the initial design work that we did, we also had to zoom in on the why, of course. And I think Joost just briefly touched upon that in the introduction. Why work with DEI can be different depending on the organization that you're in. But we had to be able to answer that. And we basically described the 4 areas that are important to us. Number 1, our company fundamentals, legacy, and culture actually inspires us to work with DEI. Secondly, we also know it's a competitive advantage, and we see that very clearly in the work we do with our clients, and we see our clients asking for our approach, our data, our perspective, so directly into our tender processes. Thirdly, we do recognize that creating diverse and psychologically safe organizations absolutely enhance our ability to innovate and to constantly develop new products aligned with our strategy. And finally, we see and we know that both current, but in particular, some of the younger generations coming into the workplace now, they expect us to be diverse. They expect us to be inclusive as they join. So the design principles were really the first step in our journey. And the next phase was to then develop the actual program. And here I want to talk a little bit about not the full program, but some of the areas that we had to think about as we were developing. First up, stakeholders. These can really be anyone from leadership, of course, that you need to have endorsing your program, but also employees in your organization, employee network groups, to the owners of the organization. Ramble is foundation owned, so ownership is extremely important to us. By taking a focused, almost structured change management approach to this, we actually were fairly confident that we had discussed initiatives with the right people before we launched anything. And again, I want to highlight the role of leadership. You need to make sure that your leadership understands that building a DEI program can bring difficult conversations and should bring difficult conversations to the table. Could be in areas such as equity or privilege, or even what it means to bring your whole self to work, and you need to be prepared for that. So in our program, where we ended up was that we decided to focus on 4 areas. 1, related to capturing relevant data. And data can be, it's not just the numbers of diversity, but it can also be pay equity data, it can be qualitative data and so forth, but really data that allows you to take the temperature of your organization and understand it. We also wanted to move the needle on diversity, and whilst Ramble does have global gender targets, in our different geographies, we do work with other targets that are meaningful, and particularly meaningful in the geography that we're in. And then we wanted to extend the conversation with the organization, so we have implemented a whole suite of groups, and we have a listening strategy that allows us to have that ongoing conversation. And then, of course, fostering inclusive behavior, starting with leadership, but absolutely working with that throughout the whole organization. So today, underneath these headlines, we have everything that we do. And then you have a program, and then you need to run it. And I want to turn your attention to a McKinsey report where we actually took a lot of inspiration from that looked at organizations who had successfully implemented and sustained DEI activities. The report highlighted 5 ways of working that we have implemented in our own work. The first and most important is to have a nuanced understanding of root causes. So what is it you're trying to solve? To have meaningful definition of success that also your leaders and employees understand. To ensure that you have accountable and invested leaders on board. To create solutions designed for context. This could be the geography context, societal context, and so forth. And last but not least, of course, to track and course correct your initiatives over time. So that was very briefly our journey. And what I want to leave you with today are a few lessons learned. And I'll talk about them in relation to the organizational perspective, preparation and speed, communication and society. So as I mentioned, we have learned a lot, and we are still learning, and we will continue to learn as we grow. We've designed a global program but with a strong geography perspective, also acknowledging that maturity differs across countries. We think a lot about how to prepare the organization before we launch anything. I think my favorite saying is sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. You can't force activities into the organization before people have had a chance to reflect and understand what it is you're trying to achieve. You also have to ensure that your program is not an HR project or something that sits on the side, but it's actually embedded in your business strategy, in your initiatives, in your leadership approach. And then I would say what we have learned and are still continuing to learn on is on communication. The more you communicate as an organization, the higher the expectations, of course, from your employees, and really expect to be challenged as well. And finally, what I want to leave you with before we go to our first poll question is that you really need to plan for unprecedented uncertainty. We're all part of both organizations and the societies we live and work in. And that means that topics emerge and re-emerge on what's happening in the world. And there is a spillover into your organizations in relation to that. And somehow your DEI program needs to be able to absorb some of those things and have good and solid discussions around it. That concludes the very brief talk about actually a journey that has taken a couple of years. So I think now we have the first poll coming up. So as Jos mentioned, we really want to engage with all of you today as well. So the first poll question here, time to vote, is which aspects of DEI do you find most challenging to implement in your organization?
And you will see a poll question coming up now in the software where you can select 4 options, being the first one, recruitment and hiring practices. Second, inclusive leadership development. Third one, measuring and benchmarking progress. And fourth, creating and maintaining an inclusive workspace culture. But the question is, which aspect of DEI do you find most challenging to implement in your organization? We look forward to your answers. So, and the results are coming back now. Thank you very much for participating. And what we look is that the inclusive leadership development gets, well, 30% roughly, so it's the least of the focus. And the main focus seems to be challenging in terms of creating and maintaining an inclusive workspace culture. Tina, could you reflect on that outcome? Is it recognizable for you also from your position?
Yes, absolutely. And I can relate to it in the respect that when you are an international organization, first of all, from a cultural perspective, inclusion can mean different things to different people. We all have different boundaries. There are all things that are important to us that we don't necessarily share with other people. So we talk a lot about the inclusive part actually related to the social backdrop that we're in Ramboll. So when things happen in the world that has a huge impact on other employees where they maybe not feel heard either in the organization, how do you then deal with that? And actually in that respect, we have found that we use our employee network groups or employee reference groups as one speaking partner, because typically these groups also come together around how to build inclusion for people who has a particular experience.
Wonderful, wonderful to hear. And please, if you have any questions for Tina, please put them up in the chat. Our moderators, our fine moderators at FIDIC will sort those questions out and prepare them for the Q&A session in the end of this webinar. Thank you again, Tina, for your excellent presentations and making us a little bit part of the journey you have made and are making at Ramboll. Second is Catherine Motley, and I'm very happy to introduce Catherine. Catherine is the Vice President of the Tax and Workforce Policy of the American Council of Engineering Companies, or short ACAC. I hope I pronounce it well. She advocates for ACAC with Congress and the administration on a range of tax, finance, and workforce issues that are of importance of the ACAC member companies. In addition to her advocacy responsibilities, Catherine also serves as a staff director for the ACAC's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Committee. She's very pleased to represent ACAC on the FIDIC Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Council, and she will take us on board and share their experiences, how the American Council of Engineering Companies measures progress on DEI, because knowing where you want to go to is one thing, but we do have to measure our progress, of course. So it's all about benchmarking, and they have developed a diversity roadmap for that. And Catherine, we are really looking forward for you to share that with us today. The floor is yours, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Joost. Excuse me. And I appreciate the chance to join everyone today and talk about this important topic. So we have a lot of ACEC members who are very active in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space. And they asked us a question that may resonate with engineers around the world, which is, how can we measure how we're doing? And in response to that question, we developed the Diversity Roadmap tool. And this tool has several different objectives. And the way it works is that if this is a benefit for any ACEC member firm, they can go into the tool each year and they answer a series of questions in the areas of workforce, workplace, marketplace, and supplier community. And once they've done that, they receive an assessment report. Now, this data and the report are confidential to the firm. So at ACEC, we don't have access to the data itself, but they get back this report and it gives them a score, an overall score, and also a score in each of those 4 categories. The other thing that it does is it gives them actions that the firm can take if they want to move along in their DEI&B journey. So the first thing the tool does is it provides a maturity model for the firms. They, as I said, they go in each year and provide this data, and they can see where they've been and where they're going and where they might go in the future. So it's a really helpful tool in that sense. The second thing that the tool does is it offers them the opportunity to benchmark themselves against other firms. And they can sort of tailor that benchmarking based on different issues, such as firms of similar size, or firms in the same geographic region of the US, or firms in the same discipline. They can sort of choose those filters and understand not just how are they themselves doing, but how are they doing in comparison to their peers. The third thing that it does, as I mentioned, their data is confidential, but the tool does provide ACEC with aggregate national data that tells us a little bit more about our industry in this space and how we're doing. So one of the things that we have learned is that most of our member firms are just beginning their DEI&B journey. About 80% are in that initial category. And this is similar to many other industries in the US that use similar tools. We know this from the provider of the tool. We took a tool that was established and we tailored it to work for our industry. But we know from them that this is true for a lot of industries. So this is not uncommon at all. One of the interesting things that we learned, the scores really don't differ significantly based on whether the firm is small or large, but what does differ is how they approach DEI&B. Small firms tend to be implementing, right? They tend to kind of dive in. Maybe a firm will decide, okay, we're going to establish an employee resource group or something like that. Larger firms, perhaps because they have more resources, tend to focus first on strategy and data. So neither approach is wrong or right, but they are different based on the size of firms. And this matters in ACEC. We know from our membership data that in the US, 75% of our member firms have 50 or fewer employees. So the industry really, even though we have a lot of really large member firms, the industry does have a lot of small firms. So when we approach DEI&B as an organization, we definitely need to keep that in mind. We need to make sure that we are providing tools and suggesting approaches that work for a range of size of firms. I'm going to share examples of questions from each of the 4 sections of the tool, so you can get a sense of the kinds of things that are, the kinds of questions that are asked, and some of the things that we have learned. And this data all comes from the 2023 report. The 2024 report is going to be released, of all times, next week at the ACEC Fall Conference, so stay tuned, there is more coming. But one of the things we asked last year in the workplace section, this section looks at how DEI&B is integrated into a firm's culture. And so we asked about the commitment of firm leaders. It was interesting, we learned that there can be a significant difference between the top leader in a firm and the next level of senior leaders. According to our data, 2/3 of CEOs are always or often demonstrating their commitment to DEI&B, but that number drops to about half for the next level of senior leaders. And that's a really important point for firms to think about. I think, as we know, unless something is integrated into the entire leadership in a firm, you might get uneven results. So that's an interesting data point that we learned in the workplace section. In the workforce section, we ask about employee recruitment and retention policies. And one of the questions relates to employee engagement assessments. So 60% of firms indicated that they conduct employee engagement studies at least annually. But firm size here really does matter. 50% of very small firms, those with 25 or fewer full-time equivalents, FTEs, conduct surveys, but 97% of large firms do the same. And we think this is probably a reflection of the resources that are available, greater resources for larger firms. In the marketplace section, that's focused on the firm's approach to marketing and promotion. And about half of firms agree that they include DEI&B strategies when they pursue work. Now, some of this is driven by the client. And so this may differ around the world, but in the US, one of the things that we see is that clients of all types ask about DEI&B, but it's more common with public sector clients, governmental entities. So this is something that we might see a little bit of a difference depending on the type of work that firms do. We have some member firms that do entirely private sector work, so it might be a little bit different for them, again, depending on their clients. And in the supplier and community section, we assess the firm's approach to engaging diverse members of the community. And here we learned that firms are more likely to articulate commitment to DEI&B when pursuing public work. And there are also regional differences in the US. So one thing to think about in the United States, although there is funding, there can be funding from the federal government that supports infrastructure of different kinds, but most of that tends to be administered at the state and local level. And so we do tend to see some of these regional differences, which can be interesting. And almost half of firms in the Northeast part of the US, so think like near New York City and Boston, report that they are always or often asked about their commitments to DEI&B when pursuing public work. But that's only about 20% in the southern part of the United States. So that regional difference is really important there. We also have a demographics section of the tool. Now, this is not scored, but it does allow us to start understanding what our industry looks like in terms of the demographics of race and ethnicity, gender, age, and other different criteria that help us to understand what does the engineering, and particularly what does the consulting engineering industry in the US really look like demographically. One of the interesting areas relates to generational differences in the workplace. And so one of the things we learned is that among our member firms, almost 60% of our member firm employees were born after 1981. So not just millennials, but the next generations younger as well. And so this is really helpful, I think, for firm leaders to think about. Our firm leaders, are generally older than that. There may be differences in, hopes and expectations of what comes from work. And so this is an important data point for our members to think about when they think about their workforce and recruiting and retaining those employees. So the last thing I want to say, as I mentioned, At next week's fall conference, we will release the 2024 Diversity Roadmap Report. We're also going to be releasing another report, which I'm really excited about. And this is that we had a group within our DEIB committee that was interested in looking at, and this was in response to questions from our members about particularly the business case for DEIB within the consulting engineering industry. As you all probably know, there are some great studies. Tina referenced one from McKinsey, and those are really helpful, but they do tend to be multi-industry and very broad. And so we did a report that is case studies of a small group of firms that use the diversity roadmap tool. And not only did they there's a qualitative section of it, but there's also a quantitative section where the firms provided their own data on financial data and workforce data rather. And so I'm excited to share that with you all. And this will be publicly available after next week. I hope you'll take a look at it. So that concludes my remarks. And Joost, I believe we have another poll question that's going to come up.
That's absolutely correct. And thank you already, Catherine, for your contribution. So very insightful. So the second question will come up for you to vote about, because we're very curious on what do you believe is the most effective way to measure DEI progress in the engineering and construction industry? So just your thoughts. And Catherine shared with us the way ACAC will monitor, not only monitor, but also benchmark companies. And the question to you is, what do you believe is the most effective way to do it from your perspective? Is it firstly employee surveys and feedback? Or are you looking more for diversity metrics in hiring and promotion, which touches upon the management levels Catherine talked about? Thirdly, the benchmarking against industry standards globally and or local. And fourthly, the project team composition and collaboration assessments, which tend to be more about, how do we work together within the teams on the projects? We are very looking forward for your votes. I hope they will come in. And just a small reminder, yes, this is because I think some great things that you shared. One of the first things that Catherine showed us, that if you're contributing to this webinar, you're thinking, well, wow, everybody is so way ahead. I think, Catherine, you shared with us that 80% are mentioning we are only just starting. So it's okay to feel like a lot of companies have an advantage, but we are still at the beginning of a journey. So interesting. Measuring in terms of a diversity in hiring promotion, that's probably less, but well, three more or less the same, where the project composition and collaboration assessment would be an effective way to measure DEI progress. Catherine, could you share some thoughts on that and reflect on that based on what you've seen in the benchmarks of ACAC, please?
Yes, and that's an interesting point, because it is something that we definitely hear from clients in the US, particularly, as I mentioned, public sector clients. They want to know that a team coming in is going to be responsive to the community. And so they want to see, who's serving on that team. Another interesting point that I've heard clients make is, not just who comes in for the project proposal, but who's actually working on the team. Sometimes they see a difference there, but they definitely are interested in knowing that the people who are coming in and designing their transit systems and their water and wastewater systems and other infrastructure are going to be understanding and sensitive to what the community wants. So that is a key concern that we've definitely heard from clients in the US.
And do you recognize that the diversity metrics in hiring and promotion could be maybe less, or is it within the realms of ACAC very important also a metric?
Well, it is interesting because we do have, particularly, and this may be a very US specific answer, but, of course, that kind of in the US, we might refer to quotas. If it is a quota, that's not legal in the US. And particularly since the Supreme Court decision last year in the affirmative action case, I think a lot of employers are very sensitive to making sure that they stay within the bounds of the law. So, but one thing that we do see is, while you cannot have specific quotas for hiring, let's say related to gender or race and ethnicity, but you can expand where you're recruiting. You can go to different universities, you can reach out in different ways that might bring in a more diverse pool for your employee, your workforce.
Yeah, well, thank you for your thoughts and your reflections, Catherine. Then I'll go on the next topic, which is the update on the policy of FIDIC, which I will do myself. And as a chair of the Advisory Council of DEIAC, I'm more than happy to talk you through the current policy and future developments. So today I'll discuss the current policy, so where we are now, and also give you a little heads up of where we're heading with this policy document. So we aim to promote diversity and inclusion within FIDIC among consulting engineers, but also in our project. That's for us is like the proof of the pudding, so to speak. Our current policy was launched in March 2022, and it focuses on three main areas. First being gender equality, secondly, ethnicity, and thirdly, religion. And they're not ranked on whatsoever, so they're equally important. However, we have chosen to focus on these three main areas. Well, why is that? And I think both Catherine and Tina already touched upon the fact that if you have a global standard, it's very difficult to give, for example, ratios for this topic because of the vast difference between regions in terms of composition. So FIDIC as a global organization, it faces challenges in setting those universal standards or ratios for diversity and inclusion due to the vast differences between regions in terms of gender equality, ethnicity, and religious practices. So these regional variations are deeply rooted in cultural, legal, and demographic factors, making it impractical to apply a, so to speak, one-size-fits-all approach. And this is what we set out from the beginning with the FIDIC policy on this topic. And these regional differences underscore the need for FIDIC to provide more to say flexible guidelines that can be adapted to the local context rather than rigid global standards and enforce them on everybody. So the basic idea of our policy is not to dictate what is good or what is bad. On a personal note, we could probably try to agree globally on what is considered very harmful for people in general. But what we've also learned is that it's nearly impossible to tell different regions what would be considered good. So this is why our policy focuses on identifying topics we should discuss to start with, and then encourages different regions to have that discussion at their own pace. And of course, FIDIC will provide a little positive encouragement to keep that momentum going. I will talk a bit more about these three specific areas and show you what kind of difference we've seen in the last few years. So first, for gender equality, we would like to go beyond just meeting quotas. We focus on improving education, working conditions, and fairness for all genders in the workplace. However, we are aware that different regions in the world have different standards. Some countries have laws in place pushing minimum ratios, enforcing fairness, while in other countries it's more left to organizations to make their own choices. For gender equality, for example, we see stark contrast in parental leave policies across nations. So for example, while Sweden offers 480 days of paid parental leave to be shared between parents, there are other countries that offer no right for paid parental leave for either parent. On ethnicity, we really encourage companies to understand and address racial and ethnic discrimination. We push for more than just following the law. We want to truly embrace diversity. So in terms of ethnicity, the concept and relevance of racial diversity vary greatly between countries. What might be considered a diverse workforce in the United States could be completely and entirely different in Japan or Nigeria, where the ethnic makeup of the population and thus the people working on projects is vastly different. For religion, we stress the importance of tolerance and accommodating different religious needs at work. So while some Western countries may focus on accommodating various religious practices in the workplace, such as prayer breaks or dress code exceptions, other nations may have state religions or stricter regulations on religious expression in public spaces. So these are differences we have to acknowledge, and still, now that we've outlined these three main areas on which we encourage discussion to develop, let me explain who we address with the policy. So first, we like to say we look in the mirror. We ask ourselves, how can FIDIC be more diverse and inclusive? Because it starts with us, it's our policy. So we want to practice what we preach. That's not easy, knowing that FIDIC is for a large part run by volunteers. Still, we strive from a position of don't tell me what I do wrong, show me what and how you do it yourself. Second, we challenge our member associates or MAs. Some of them already have very sophisticated policies in place, and we are very eager to share their experiences and tools with other MAs. We see MAs push consulting engineers and firms to step up on their efforts. So we're all in this together, and we're trying to raise those standards across regions. I think the example of ACAC was a very good example of sharing that. Thirdly, we try to empower companies. So we encourage them to bring D&I into their projects and make choices that create more inclusive societies. So today is a good example of letting companies share their stories, like Tina shared our story of Rumble, and inspire other professionals and companies about what their journey could look like. So in our policy, we ask companies and MAs to dig deeper on 5 specific topics and look at where they can make a change. So the first topic is education and skills diversity. Companies should keep track of and improve their staff's education and skills. Secondly, a diverse engagement in committees or groups. So we recommend regularly checking diversity in committees and at the board level. Thirdly, employment and practices. We encourage creating fair opportunities in areas like salary, training, and skills development. Fourthly, social return on investment. Companies should measure and improve their positive impact on society. And lastly, and fifth, social behavior. We suggest using various tools to assess and improve inclusivity in decision making. Now, looking ahead to 2025, we're working on updating this current policy. And the new draft expands on how FIDIC can contribute in 3 ways. So firstly, improving FIDIC's own diversity and inclusion, and challenging committees and board to look for ways to improve this. Secondly, a real contribution in collaborating with MAs on the topics of benchmarking, KPIs, and also with guidelines. And thirdly, challenging those consulting engineers to implement better DEIAC measures and share like the good examples or inspiring examples. These updates aim to spark evolution in our industry, which was the basic idea of our policy. It's not a revolution, it's more evolution. So making diversity and inclusion core values in every company. We as the Council look forward to seeing the policy published in 2025, and I personally look forward to seeing how all stakeholders will bring their energy and focus to the table and move discussions on these topics further. So I'm really looking forward for any questions and discussions in the Q&A session. Thank you for listening for this contribution. And I will introduce the last speaker being Charlotte Downs, joining us from New Zealand. Charlotte is the program director for the diversity agenda in New Zealand, at the Association of Consulting Engineers. The Diversity Agenda is an award-winning movement committed to helping the architecture and engineering consultant industry become more diverse and inclusive through awareness, empowerment, and action. The Diversity Agenda has grown since inception for more than 150 members across the country and nearly 60 chief executive and business owners signing the Diversity Agenda Accord and being held publicly accountable for achieving truly diverse industries. Charlotte, we are looking forward in you introducing the FIDIC Guide to Inclusive Meetings. Share with us what it is, why it matters, maybe you can show us how to use it in your next meeting as like a small heads up for this. Charlotte, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joost, and yeah, kia ora from New Zealand. It's great that we've all taken time out of our busy schedules to attend this webinar. And it's fascinating when I looked at how much time we actually spend in meetings. I don't know if anyone knows how much time. The research I found says that we spend 85% of our time in meetings, which is a lot. And I think post-pandemic, hybrid meetings have become the all-new, the new normal. And work is what you do, not where you go. And I'm super proud to be part of the FIDIC Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Council, and we've been developing a set of guidelines to support us all across the globe in how we create inclusive meetings. So why is it important that we create inclusive meetings? It's about creating environments where everyone feels valued and heard, and an inclusive meeting means that we're hearing all of the voices around the organisation, and that leads to better problem solving and better project outcomes, and innovation fuels great ideas. And I think that's what meetings are really about, ensuring that you know, we're hearing from everybody and that everyone can contribute to the success of any outcome that the organisation is focused on. But this is also a real 101 for leadership. So as leaders across the globe, regardless whether you're in a people leadership role, a project leadership role, or you're leading a meeting, it's really essential that we do walk the talk and apply some of these really inclusive leadership behaviours that ensure that we can get the most out of the time that we spend, the 85% of the time that we spend in meetings. So to start, it might seem like these tips might seem like some really simple things, but I think we can all we'll all take something away from this. So the first is around setting clear objectives and an agenda. And it might seem like a simple thing, but I don't know how often you go into meetings and you're given an agenda right before you head into the meeting, or there isn't an agenda and you're going in just to see what it's all about and the hope that you'll be able to add some value. Well, for some people, that's really tough, particularly if we think about people who have more of a preference for introversion, or people who do need more think time, so they're thinkers and really need some processing time. And I think if we want to get the most out of people in that meeting time, setting a clear agenda and objectives and giving people that time to process and think and reflect is vital, particularly people who are neurodivergent. So people, I spoke to somebody recently who was autistic, and she's in engineering, and she said, the most important thing for me to be able to be my best in a meeting is knowing what I'm going into, knowing what the agenda is so that I can contribute. The other really important thing is making sure that you've got diverse representation in the meeting. And McKinsey research talks, we all know the McKinsey research, as a reminder, companies in the top quartile of ethnic and gender diversity outperform in their industry. And we know that having diversity around the table leads to better innovation, better ideas, and solving problems with more creative ideas. And so I challenge everyone to, as they're looking at the tracking on who is attending the meeting, challenging people and saying, look, or the organisers, and saying, have we got the right people around the room to solve what we need to in this meeting? Who are we missing? And who do we need to be bringing in to ensure that people with lived experience are part of those conversations. When is the meeting? It's important to think about the timings, because you'll have people within your organisations who are parents, who have sports commitments, and who have a life outside of work. So gauging the team and knowing the schedule and rhythm of your people is really important in terms of inclusive leadership, and setting meetings for times that people are actually available and it's not interfering with life outside of work. In the meeting, it's really important to establish ground rules. And that might be setting up front the tone around using the hand up icon, ensuring that people aren't talking over each other. But there will be people in the meeting who don't contribute. And I don't know how many meetings you've been in where there's always someone who doesn't have a voice in the meeting. That can be quite soul destroying for someone to leave a meeting for an hour and think, I didn't say anything, but I had a great idea. I wish I'd been able to put my 2 cents worth in. And we've really got to understand that also, if we look at it from a cultural perspective, there will be other sort of cultural barriers that might prevent people from having a voice, but also some of the bias that exists within meetings around groupthink or people looking to the leader to make decisions. So there's some really great things to think about there, and that you create small breakout rooms. Teams has some really good functionality, and there are other tools where you can provide opportunities for people to talk in small groups and then come back and have somebody feedback the ideas of that small group. Another great way to mitigate that is round robin. So everyone around the table being able to have their say at the end of the meeting or during the meeting. So everyone gets to have the opportunity to speak. And also utilising the chat function, which we're doing today, where we can put ideas and questions and our thinking in the chat so that we feel like we're interacting even if we're not speaking. And giving people a heads up ahead of the meeting if you are looking for them to speak is key. People where English isn't their first language, or people who aren't confident speaking up in meetings, giving them a heads up that you're going to ask them to speak about a topic or a piece of work that they have or a project is really helpful. Something that an organisation I saw do that I thought was really cool is introducing a voice champion role within meetings. So every team meeting, there's a voice champion. And that voice champion, their role is to make sure that everyone gets to put their ideas forward. And that rotates. So every meeting, there's a new voice champion. I think that's a great idea if you've got large teams. It also gives someone an opportunity to take on a leading role and make sure that they are also being a champion for inclusion. There are some great tools out there. So Copilot now has meeting minute takers. So a good piece of digital technology to then let everyone in the meeting participate while the robot takes the minutes, which is proving to be a bit of a game changer for us in some of our meetings, and a lot quicker. Also, Speaker Coach on Microsoft Teams is fantastic. So Speaker Coach, you can set before your Teams meetings, if you're using Microsoft Teams, and Speaker Coach gives you a report at the end of the meeting on how inclusive you were. It's a private coaching session between you and Teams, and you get a report to tell you, are you using inclusive language? Are you, are there words that maybe you should think about rephrasing? So it's great to just have a little bit of extra support there. But also, I'd recommend everyone do some learning around cultural awareness, especially when it comes to video tech. For example, in North America, requiring someone to turn on their video can be considered non-inclusive. But I think also considering for non-native speakers, using visual cues for non-native speakers is essential. And then finally, after the meeting, your work's not done at the end of the meeting, giving everyone a voice, having a voice, having a voice champion, and making sure that the hours are, the meeting's in the right time zone, making sure that you've set clear objectives and agenda. You might think you've nailed that, but actually it's after the meeting. Often some of the best ideas come after the meeting. And that same individual I spoke to, who is neurodivergent, said, and I leave a meeting and I go, oh, I wish gosh, I'd said that one idea. It often comes to me when I'm in a quiet space after a meeting. And so the follow-up is really essential, and following up with the meeting minutes, whether they've been created by a co-pilot or you've had somebody taking the minutes, or you've taken the minutes, but also then providing the option for people to come back and contribute after the meeting. That really ensures that everyone has a voice before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. And then the final thing I will say is feel confident and comfortable to challenge. If you are invited to a meeting and you're the only woman attending the meeting, or you're on a panel or speaking at a conference and you see that there is a lack of diversity in the room or on the panel, I think we all can challenge that in this day and age and actually say, that doesn't look right to me. I don't feel comfortable being part of that. And that's where the panel pledge comes in, where we actually have the right to say, hey, in the right tone and with the right intent, seeing how can we create some positive change in some of those situations. And the final thing is the missing chair analogy. So in a meeting, in one of our meetings recently, there was an empty chair, and we said, during the meeting, we finished the meeting and we said, there's an empty chair in the room, who's not here? So if we're trying to solve for Māori, for example, and we're trying to solve for our Indigenous people, and we don't have somebody who is Māori in the room, that's not going to fly for us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so ensuring that that chair has the right people, have the right people in it, and so that we're actually solving with those and bringing people with us, and ensuring that for us it's by Māori for Māori, but in any case it's an opportunity for the right people to be in the room. So that is everything from me. I will hand back to Joost, and I'm sure, everyone's got meetings to get to later. I look forward to hearing how more inclusive they are in the future.
Well, wonderful, Charlotte. Wonderful. Thank you for this fast track, but the very thorough look ahead of what's going on with these guidelines and why it's relevant. And I just want to mention that those guidelines will be published within a few weeks, and we will create a information package tool involved in this webinar to share this with you. So it's going to be I think it's going to be a game changing in sense that it's both in terms of stepping up professionally. It really helps to improve the quality of your meetings from a professional standard, because you can be more aware of what you're talking about and be more precise about it, and at the same time opening the door to have a more inclusive setting where people have a larger sense of belonging and feel free to really speak up their mind. So I thank you very much, Charlotte, for that. And on a personal note, about which words to use, I recently became aware that I was mirroring another person who would sit in meetings, and she would address the people in the meeting with guys, like, okay, guys, we're going to do this. And I was checking out of a meeting myself, and I hear myself saying, okay, guys, this and guys that. And which is awkward. I say, okay, this is just I'm mirroring somebody else, but coming from me, it's probably different for the other people in the room hearing this. So just want to emphasize it's a work in progress, and that's the fun part. So we're now here on the top of the hour, and we have some space for like I would suggest a 2 minutes Q&A. Some questions have already popped up, which is great. I will try to do my best to rephrase the questions and direct them and moderate this Q&A session. I think the floor is still open for extra questions. If you want to post questions to either Charlotte, Catherine, Tina, or myself, or you just want to pose a question, if you just have an open question to us, we can reflect on that. And a first question came already quite early on, and I think it's a question which could be addressed both by Tina and Catherine. is about how does generational mindset, something is beeping. I really hope that it's not, so close it. How does generational mindset affect the continuity of maintaining a good workplace force, and is it harder to maintain a good workplace force, especially in construction projects, due to varying generational mindset? So it's like a double question. So I would really love to hear your thoughts, Tina, and then I will ask Catherine to check in. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Joost. It's a good question, and I don't think there's any one answer. I think so. What we have done in Ramble is we actually follow. And there's a lot of research out there around different kinds of generations, and especially the younger generations coming into the workplace now. And in a way, you can view it as another diversity dimension. And I think you have to sort of, as an organization and as leaders, you actually have to educate yourself on the expectations of some of those generations coming into the workplace. I don't think we can do without them. We have to have them in our organizations, but you also have to understand the mindset that they come with. Some of the big ticket items that we have looked at in Ramble has been that they come in with a completely different expectation of career and what career is and how long they expect to stay in an organization. And it definitely is very different from when I was growing up and building my career. So I think by having that understanding of the different generations, if you can get them to play together or to work together, then you will be in a much better place. But it's not easy.
Thank you, Tina. Very good. And Catherine, could you add to that from your perspective?
Yes, and thinking, sort of building on something that Tina said, thinking about different generations. One of the things we've heard from our members, in the ACEC membership, firms are generally owned by people who work at the business. So sometimes that's the entire workforce, but sometimes it's a key team of leaders. One of the things we've been hearing is that younger people, and it may connect to the point Tina made about people not staying at the same company their whole career, but are showing, at least at this point, a little bit less interest in ownership. And if that continues, or if firms aren't able to somehow mitigate that and demonstrate the value of being an owner, it really would change the model for how firms are owned. So those kind of generational differences can have a fundamental impact on firms themselves.
Thank you very much. I have more a follow-up question, but I think I will start with you, Catherine, with this one. And it's a question from Leon Momberger. He asking, not all DEI factors are to be registered by a company, for example, because it's not only frowned upon, but sometimes it's not even legally based because of privacy rules, like gender or ethnic origin. How does it work in the States, and how do you work that into your benchmarking? But because you do benchmark on this.
Yes, it's a great question, and I think that employers everywhere have to be really aware of what's legal where they're operating, and that's going to be especially true for multinational companies, I would think. If you're functioning in different places in the world, you're going to have to be really aware of what's legal in each location and sort of shape your programs around that. In the US, it's not only, it is legal to collect demographic data on your employees. And in fact, larger companies in the US are required to report that data to the Equal Employment Opportunity Council. So, you can do that here, but what you can't do is have specific targets for hiring and things like that. I think it can be a tightrope that firms have to walk. Sometimes you can, on the one hand, you can't have quotas. On the other hand, you can have clients, sometimes the federal government, saying, we want to see how you're doing in this space. And so I think it is challenging.
Oh, thank you very much. And building from the benchmark of Catherine, where she showed us that 2/3 of the CEOs show commitment, but on a lower, not a lower level management, but lower than CEO board level. So it's middle management, I guess. that ratio drops. And I saw a question about, from Tosin Awunusi. He asking, how do you get management commitment to integrate DEI into an organization? And I would like to pass that to Tina and ask her also a little bit to reflect on maybe the top level and, you know, the middle management. What are your experiences?
Thank you. My experience is that, first of all, you have to have that top leadership commitment. Otherwise, it's extremely difficult. From a Ramble perspective, what I can say is that we actually, it was back to some of the things I spoke about in the beginning. For us, it's not an HR project. It is actually embedded in who we are as an organization. We can draw a direct line from our Ramble mission to create societies where people live and flourish to our program. Of course, it is also a significant factor that we know that having a great program and approach improves our ability to recruit talent. We're all in this together. And then I think we have a very strong business case for the business asking for our support. So, and I think maybe it was Catherine that mentioned something about that as well, but in particular for public tenders, in some of our large geographies, so the UK and the US, we see a strong push from our clients and potential clients in wanting to understand both what do we do internally in Ramble and how do we also work when we come onto the project. So there's a very strong business case there for Ramble to work with this. But ultimately, it is related to the foundation we stand on and who we are as an organization.
And I guess this is one of those things which could be also regional, of course. You know, if you're in a region where the client really drives a competition on this point, you want to outperform your peers in the market to get those projects and contracts. On the other hand, if you have a more intrinsic motivation and you can choose which client to serve because, you know, you have the opportunity, it's probably also makes sense that you are really thinking of, okay, if I can choose between 8 clients with a certain team, what's important for that team, and maybe they make the choice to go for the client that drives the DEI the most, for example. So it's either a push or a pull, so to speak. Thank you very much. So a quick question to Charlotte, and it's a quick question, but it's maybe also a big question, of course. So you showed us a little bit about those guidelines, and I was thinking about, you know, the assumption probably is that it's beneficial for all employees in the team to work according to. But one of those questions is, how do you overcome any possible resistance, you know, when you're saying, okay, we're going to change the way we meet, we're going to change the way we approach you in those meetings. Can you share your thoughts about that and your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like any business initiative, the best way to land something like this, whether it be a change to how we do things around here, is to get your people invested in the conversation, and to the 10th McKinsey report that came out recently around parity was that we need to re-sign up and be accountable. And so I think getting people to see the value, whilst we think that we've got people across the line in terms of the value of diversity and inclusion, we still need people to recommit to being on this journey and then going. And so now we need to look at all of our business processes. And in this case, we're looking at making our meetings more inclusive so that we can get the best out of all of your diverse views and perspectives. But we want you to feed into how that might look. There are some initial ideas that we'll float, and they might be some of the tips that we've heard on the call today, but actually asking the people how they feel about the meetings and how they're operating at the moment, and what else can we do to make them more inclusive? And I think that might be something that you could tackle in a one-to-one setting in your regular catch-up, but also as a team, so that people feel that they've got a safe space to say, well, actually, I don't feel like I'm inputting and I wish I could more, or the agenda's not coming out in the right time for me. I always feel like I'm on the back foot, or I think just creating a really safe space for people to contribute. And that's where I think you get the buy-in, rather than doing it to people, doing it together.
Yeah, and I really like it if you explain it like this, because from if you're very accustomed, of course, to FIDIC contracts, it's quite binary. You know, you do this or you do that. If you do it like this, it's good. If you do it like that, it's bad. I think we're stepping into maybe it's a generational thing, but these sets of guidelines, I think, and that's what you're showing us and telling us also. It's about adopting them and making them work for you. And it's not something, if you implement them on the first day, it's going to work perfectly. But it's also about, I think, kind of an intentional thing, right? It's the way you have the intention of using that. Is if you use it like a strict guidelines and enforce it on everybody, that's probably not the way you envision it, right, Charlotte?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it just goes back to being inclusive leaders and caring for our people and making sure that our people leave every interaction and every meeting feeling that they've positively contributed, which then leads to better ideas and decision making on these projects.
Oh, wonderful. I think I have a last question, and it's actually a question I think I can pose it best to Prashant, if you're okay with it, Prashant. Because one of the questions is about these guidelines. Should they also be applied to events promoted by FIDIC? Which you know, you're the man.
Well, I must say that I've seen the work in progress, and I would like to first of all thank the D&I Council for the work that's been putting into the guidelines, and I think it's a very nice handy book, and everybody will see it when it comes out in a few weeks. And the intention is, as you said, to adopt what we're trying to preach ourselves as well first, and that started with the adoption of the policy back in 2022. So I think it's important that, yes, FIDIC will look at the guidelines and look at what is being produced, and also try and imbibe that within ourselves, because honestly, as Charlotte mentioned, in many meetings and committee meetings that FIDIC has, and you've got so many different volunteers from so many different ethnicities and backgrounds, that you really want to make sure that everybody feels a part of the ecosystem. They feel that they're contributing, and that they're able to express themselves without hesitating, without being intimidated by anybody else, even if just because they may not be a native language speaker for the English language or something like that. So yes, for sure, I think that was something that we will look at, seeing how best we can imbibe as well.
Wonderful, good to hear, and thank you for chipping in with this. So I'm looking at the clock, and I think we have finished the rounds of Q&A. Just checking if there's a last question coming up. I don't think. Maybe just like the final question, and I would like to pose it to Tina, because you have so well spoken about the journey within Ramble. I was curious, what was like a major eye-opener for you personally, where you thought, oh, this is going to work one way, and it totally worked the other way around? Could you share us like a last thought or a last eye-opener?
I think I spoke a little bit about it. I think it's the when you come out as an organization and you say that this is what we believe in, this is what we stand for, prepare to be challenged. I mentioned before that, for example, what's very popular right now or these days is to talk about bringing your whole self to work. And I believe that is true, but what does it actually mean? And individuals could potentially challenge you in that. So what is it about myself I can bring to work, and how much of it? And as an organization, you need to be prepared to have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations and questions. But I think we had all of the best intentions when we started out, and of course we still do. But we have also learned along the way that when you make a promise to the organization, they will follow up. And they will hold you accountable, and they should.
Wow. Wonderful words, stepping out of the comfort zone to meet each other. I think that's a great takeaway. So I will keep it short. I think I would wrap this webinar up for the Q&A part. I would really thank Catherine, Tina, and Charlotte for the outstanding presentations and taking us with you on your journeys and sharing your experiences. And I would gladly hand over to Prashant for some final closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joost. And first of all, thank you, Tina, Catherine, and Charlotte for your very insightful presentations. And of course, to our lovely audience for joining us today and for participating. I'm seeing the lovely questions coming in and the lovely Q&A session. And I think there was one particular question about could a summary be put together of what has been spoken about, and I can assure you that will be with you very soon. It will be shared with you, and it will also go on FIDIC's LinkedIn page about the webinar, giving you an insight of what has been discussed. But I just like to take some of the key takeaways and point out that yes, leadership is the key to driving D&I initiatives. DEI brings a competitive advantage to your firm. It allows companies to innovate better. Diversity is not just gender equality, but means a lot more than that. And it has different relevance in different geographies. So you make sure that your program factors that in, and also it needs to be agile. The FIDIC D&I policy, it's based on 3 fundamentals of gender equality, ethnicity, and religion. And we are looking forward to the new policy coming out, which should be coming out in 2025. At the same time, a very fascinating diversity tool of ACEC, which provides an assessment of how the firms can assess and how they are performing on D&I. It was very interesting to also note from Catherine that 80% of the member firms are just beginning their D&I journey, which really makes it very encouraging for small firms in smaller geographies to say that, okay, you're never going to be too late with it. It's never too late to begin your DEI journey. So if you haven't started yet, don't fear. There are enough tools, there are enough guidelines and enough support available. And I encourage everyone to begin their D&I journey sooner than later. And of course, as Charlotte presented, a very interesting guideline for creating inclusive meetings, which will soon be coming out. And I expect that in another 5 or 6 weeks, the policy should be out, the guideline should be out, which should help you in creating a very inclusive environment for your meeting. And then lastly, I'd like to request you to continue to participate in various FIDIC activities. We have 2 upcoming activities, one being the FIDIC State of the World Report on capacity building and closing the sustainability skills gap in infrastructure, which will be released very shortly. And also an upcoming FIDIC International Contract Users Conference, which will be in London, December 2nd to December 4th. I encourage you who are in the region to come and participate and look at the projects and look at the project awards, which are going to be handed out for the Contract Users Conference. And lastly, once again, the committee for the lovely work that they do and help the board in maintaining the focus on DEI as we go around. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you at the next FIDIC webinars. Thank you.